Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's demo. It's going to be presented by Ken Town. We are giving people just a couple minutes to enter into the webinar. And if you'll just hang tight, grab a water, grab a coffee, and we'll get started in just a minute or two. All right, looks like we've got a great group assembled here, so we can get started. Ken, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jordan. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. My name's Ken. I'm on the Adversary Research Team here at AttackIQ. I'm primarily focused on threat actor tracking, help develop our attack graphs, do a lot of malware reverse engineering to make our scenarios more realistic. And today, what I want to talk about is attack flows. I'm going to go over what are attack flows, why do I think they're useful, how have I used them in previous lives. I'm going to do a demo of the attack flow builder that MITRE CTID has released, and then I want to finish off by talking about how we leverage attack flows at AttackIQ. So first off, let's talk about what is the attack flow project. And so attack flow itself is just a way to organize and structure an attack. And MITRE CTID is the Center for Threat Informed Defense. One of the projects that they started was trying to formalize attack flows. So they did a V1, and then back in October, they were able to iterate on that after getting feedback and presenting and doing all sorts of demos. And they've come up with what I think is a really great implementation of it. And so according to them, the attack flow, it's just a data model that helps describe sequences of adversary behaviors. And you can use these sequences and descriptions to help on your detection engineering side, your threat intel side, the way that you present to leadership and talk about threats. And again, try to keep everybody just on the same page so that there is some kind of organization to the chaos to all the future vendor reporting. So it's something that I hope more vendors will begin to introduce into their own reporting, because it will make consuming and utilizing those reports easier. And so to talk about attack flows, what you really need to understand are 5 core objects, okay? The first one is the attack flow, and this is all taken from the MITRE blog post that talks about this. The link is at the bottom. But the attack flow is that attack chain overall. So it's the entire reference that's linking all of the other objects together, whether those are STIX indicator objects or the other specific attack flow objects. Okay. An action is what they call the execution of a particular technique, or what we would call a scenario at AttackIQ. This is a specific thing that an actor has done. This is them dumping a password. This is them moving laterally. This is them searching for files and directories. This is the actual behavior that they are doing. An asset is going to either be like the source or target of an action. So you could have an action that's targeting a web server and it's coming from, you know, a Tor network node. And so those would be 2 different kinds of assets. An asset could also be a person, so a user who's clicking a link, or a specific target of an attack. They could be the files that are involved that would need to facilitate a phishing with a malicious attachment. Okay. The next one is the operator, and this is a Boolean logic note that you can say or and this allows you to group different actions together. So if they're performing multiple discovery techniques or they're trying multiple initial access methods, right, only one of those has to work for them to continue on. And so you would use that attack operator and that attack condition combined with that to say whether or not your attack was successful. And that's the last piece, that attack condition. So this is, of all of those things and evaluating the logic, what was the final results of that? And so I want to show one quick example. This is taken from their Conti attack flow that they created. This is from their attack builder. And so up in the orange, those are the assets. So the first is a person. It's a user of a workstation. That's the patient 0 up at the top. And then they also call out an asset of a Microsoft Office document. And you can see that in orange is going to tell you what kind of node it is. The lines indicate the direction that the flow is going. In this case, you know, all these attacks, the actions which are in blue are targeting the asset, that person, or using a Microsoft Office document. So that's why they point that way. And in blue, you're going to see the name of the technique that's being used. And then they offer the ability to put in a bunch of metadata. So this includes the TIDs, references that if you want to dump this to like a sticks file, you can use the specific IDs that are used for attack patterns, and then giving, you know, free form descriptions to help explain what's going on. And the lines are all pointing down to an OR. So this actor is trying 4 different things to get some malware executed on a patient 0 workstation, right? So they try social engineering via phone calls or emails, trying to get them to click links. So that's the third one, the spear phishing link. They might have fake software that they buy ads for. And so someone's looking for, you know, a image editing software, and they'll get a fake ad and download their Trojanized version, or maybe they're sending out phishing attachments. And so Conti was doing all of this. And so if any one of those 4 initial actions are successful, so that's why the lines go down to or, then the user of patient 0 workstation is compromised would be true. So if none of those things are valid and not successful, then that user is not compromised. So that's just one chain, and you can see that the line going down means that there's way more to this graph. And so, yeah, that looks really nice. It's very pretty. It would show up great on a slide or a report, but why is that valuable? And so I think anyone who has a kid going through elementary math has seen this kind of problem, or if you're browsing social media, you'll see lots of discussions about what's the real answer to this math formula. And we all know that order of operations really matters. So if I want to determine what the answer is, I need to know how am I supposed to process this data, parentheses, multiplication, division, you know, addition, PEMDAS, when do I do those operations? And the point of having attack flows and trying to organize this information, creating order from that, is so that we all can operate off the same structure of data and know where I need to do my defenses. So if we look at the equation as the attacker and the answer as the defense, I need to know what the attacker is doing, how they're doing it, and that's going to help me come up with the right solution to protect my company. And so why it's important to not just think of things as single isolated events. You know, we've moved away a lot from just standalone AV, where you're scanning a single file, where you're only looking at one thing in isolation to decide if it's bad or good. You know, you see this proliferation of people living off the land using native binaries. Someone who runs Who Am I or NetView, like those are not bad things, but its place in the order of all of the operations that have occurred can start to tell you what might be happening. And so this is why a lot of security vendors have moved towards their behavioral-based detection or their machine learning detection to try and find all of this noise in that chaos, you know, go through all that noise in the chaos and find the right stuff. This is an image taken from Kaspersky's write-up about how they're using machine learning in cybersecurity. It's a great blog. I highly recommend looking through it, or their wiki page here. They talk about all the different ways that they're using machine learning to help them make decisions on those files. How do I see through all of the things that appear to be the same and find out what's different? And, you know, in order for us to be able to use attack flows, we need threat reporting to step their game up. So this is from the most recent CISA alert. And you see this a lot now in almost all vendor security reporting, all threat intel briefings. They give you a nice table at the end. They list out all of the techniques that an actor used, maybe a description. Sometimes they'll give the actual raw commands, but a lot of times they're just doing it at a very high level. And they'll organize it by the way that the tactics are organized in the attack framework. And that's okay. That is a relevant order, but it may not be the way that that attack actually escalated and improved what the actor was trying to do. And so in order to try and understand how did this attack unravel, you have to read through the blog, try to infer from the narrative. Maybe they give you some files and you got to reverse engineer those to try and figure out where you're going. It's very difficult, but it's worthwhile, and I'll get into why. One vendor, or they're not really a vendor, but it's a blog that's out there that I think is doing it the right kind of way, is the DFIR report. I think anything that they put out is really awesome. They do a great timeline. And so not only do they link it to the actual attacks that are being done and go into great technical detail, but that timeline is so important because it actually shows what the actor is doing and the order that they're doing it. So this is ripe for us to be able to take and turn into an attack flow and actually see how an attack like this would progress. What are they doing first? What ended up being the key thing that allowed them to get to the next stage, or what is it that they found that made them decide to go down a certain path? It's way easier to look at this timeline or an attack flow and understand what occurred than just looking at a list of techniques in a table. And so that order, I keep harping on why I think it's important, why you need to spend the time going through it and understanding those reports, and maybe you put it into a formalized thing like MITRE's attack flow builder, but even just putting them in the correct list is important. And so what I want to take a look at is this is a basic ransomware attack through phishing and all the techniques that were used. So on the initial access, we have spear phishing. Execution in this attack, we saw 3 different ways that they executed. They used PowerShell, the Windows native API, the user execution of clicking a malicious file. For persistence, we saw them use a scheduled task in a Windows service, defense evasion, clearing their event logs, decoding or deobfuscating some files, disabling and modifying tools, discovery, looking for remote systems, files, and accounts. For command and control, they use both web and FTP. They exfil data to cloud storage, and for impact, obviously, is the ransomware event, and that's them doing the data encryption. And so if you were to just take this list and use the tactic order that MITRE uses, you might feel real good when you do your analysis of your detection and prevention. Whether you're running it in a BAS and you're confirming for sure whether or not you would prevent this, or you're just looking at what kind of security controls, you might come back and go, okay, it's not great, but I do have detection signatures written for at least 2 of these things, or maybe I have preventative controls that would stop 2 of these things. And I look at that last one, I go, hey, at least I didn't get ransomware, right? We stopped the data from being encrypted, so I don't have to worry about that. And if I scroll up, I see, oh, I prevented the scheduled tasks for persistence. And so I start to feel pretty good about myself. But the reality is, just because the tactics are organized that way doesn't mean that's the way that the attacks occurred. So if I'm only testing these controls in isolation, I may not actually have the preventive or detection controls that I think I do. And so if we look at the real attack order, it's going to work out something more akin to, you get a spear phishing attachment, the user opens it, some PowerShell is running because of the macros, it deobfuscates maybe another binary with certutil, gets executed via the Windows native API, they look for those network controls, they do C2. They look for some files, they do C2. They look for some files again, they do more C2. Maybe see some file transfer, maybe they're sending some of the files to themselves, they exfil some large data to cloud storage, more command and control, look for additional systems, more command and control, then they move into the ransomware event. At this point, they're disabling or modifying tools, they're clearing the event logs, now they set up the scheduled task to run the ransomware. Now, when we took a look on the left of where I saw my preventions, I felt pretty good. I'm high up on persistence. However, that persistence did not occur until the very end. And so I don't get to feel as good because I failed at stopping the cloud storage. So I've lost all of my data because they used a different kind of persistence mechanism before that. And so without understanding the order of the actual operations, what the flow of the attack was, I don't know where I successfully stopped this thing. And one of the other key pieces here too is them doing disabling or modifying tools. Well, if they're disabling the security controls that I would later use to try and stop the scheduled task or maybe that data encryption, maybe those things aren't actually prevented. And that's why it's important when you're evaluating these reports that you're doing it like the actor would have done it. What things occurred pre and post that would have maybe allowed them to be more successful and weaken your defenses to stop those things. So in this case, I would know that I have a lot of work ahead of me to try and catch up and protect myself earlier up in the kill chain. Now, this is what I would want to give to my leadership about why I need to invest in maybe something to help me up at the top versus just relying on these 2 things at the bottom. right, so let's go into a live demo. I want to talk and show the attack flow builder. So the easiest way to find this is just to go to the Google or your preferred search engine, type in attack flows. Your first result is going to be MITRE CTID's blog about the attack flow and the project. And so from this page, they'll talk about the summary, how they solved it, and then the main piece is these project resources. So the project announcement is, again, just more a narrative of why they're doing this, what they're doing about it. The project website, this is going to be all of their raw documentation so that you can learn a lot more. A link to the online builder. So they already have an up and running builder that you can use, but you can also download all of the source code from GitHub and run it yourself. So I'm just going to go and run their attack flow builder. And when you first walk in, this looks very much like a draw.io interface or a different kind of flow charting, but you may not know where to begin. And so you can easily go up to the help, and you can do the attack flow builder help. And this will walk through and talk about how do you actually use the tool, how they recommend using it. You can read through the best practices guide. If you know a lot about it and you want to extend it, you can go to the developers. But I think one of the most easiest ways that you can learn more about this is to actually look through example flows. So in the GitHub repository, they have a ton of attack flows that have been pre-built by other members of CTID and the people that developed this project. And so you can open those up and see how they look. And so if you go to the documentation, you can go ahead and just do a direct link and open it from here because they're published inside the builder itself. Or if you're running this offline, again, these files are inside the GitHub repository. So if I open this up, this is what a full attack flow looks like. And just looking through this, I can tell that there's multiple stages to this attack just by going off the color. So, the actor's doing something here in the top, and they're going to move into another phase of attack. There's going to be some decision logic that's going to say whether or not they should move on to the next one, and so on. And then if I zoom in, again, this is that first screenshot that I provided. You can see what the assets are, the actions. If you click on any one of them, it'll take you to the metadata. So this metadata is freeform, what they're putting in, and allows you to edit and change what they're doing. You can provide some confidence on whether or not you know for a fact that this occurred, or if you're just using your own educated experience to add in additional steps. And then if we wanted to add anything more to it, the way that you add new nodes is you just right-click and go down to create. Now you have a couple of options. You can add some existing sticks objects, for indicators. If you want to really flesh this out from like a breach that you experienced and you're trying to create some reporting that you want to share. But if you just want to build more of the attack flows, you just go to the attack flow and you have action, asset, condition, or your operators. And so let's say I want to, my own knowledge, I know that they were using another initial access method. So I would just go to attack flow, create a new action, and I'll get a new little button here. I just drag around wherever I want to place it. And now once I click on it, I have all of my metadata that I can now enter. So my new name, let's call this Trojanized pirated software, right? So maybe they're uploading some torrents that they've put backdoors inside of software for common programs like Microsoft Office that users might be looking for. The tactic ID, I would pull that from MITRE. The same thing with the reference and the TID I would put in here, whatever the TID is, a reference for it, a freeform description, the confidence that I have, and maybe I just heard it from a friend. I don't know for sure, so I can change to doubtful, and it'll say what you have here. And then if I had some time blocks of when they were doing this, I could add it. Now, how do I get this and connect to these additional nodes? Well, just like a flow chart, when you go to the boundaries of the objects, they open up little X's, and you can just drag and drop, connect it to another dot on there. And the same thing, I can feed this into my OR. And you can manipulate these lines to make them more readable or try to combine them. It's up to you. And then same thing here, maybe if they couldn't compromise, maybe they would do something else, right? So now they would search for somebody on LinkedIn and try to do more social engineering, move on to a different target. But it's very simple to add new notes, change what's there and start over from scratch. You can just do file, new file. And the first thing that you're going to fill out here is in the properties. So if you don't have any nodes selected, this is where you would provide the name of what your attack flow will be, your description, who it is that's creating it. Is this a report? Is this an incident? Is this about an entire threat actor's capabilities? You choose the scope. And then if there's URLs and reports that you want to add to it, you can add all of those. And then you would just start by creating your different objects. I highly recommend going through a bunch of examples just to get a feel for how are they laying things out, how do different lines connect. But at the end, you end up finding some really cool use cases. And so this one is for the Cobalt Kitty campaign. And what I like about this one is they really go into some details. And so this is why I think this is great for the kind of reporting that you might do internally. So description of who that actor is, the first time they saw it, what their goals and levels are. You can just add a ton of additional information that makes this as useful as you want. So this goes beyond just attack, command happened here, then the next command happened there, right? You can use this to perform that narrative and share this and keep this internal. Now, when you want to save your results, you do publish. You can save it as an image or publish attack flow, and this will allow you to save that JSON. And this JSON can actually be imported by other tools, or you can then load this again later to edit and share with someone else. That way it doesn't have to be online and visible to everybody. It's just for you. And if you're using the online version, none of this data is being sent back to their systems at all. It's all just happening in JavaScript and memory, so it's safe to put things in. But again, if you want to keep this completely isolated, just stand up the project from GitHub. Okay. So that covers the attack flow builder. We have all of their examples. The best practices guide talks about how reports should be documented, what should you not do. The language goes into a lot more detail of the raw values and sticks. So if you want to use the Python interface, right, you can script and build these attack flows. You don't have to use the builder. If you've got your own SOAR platform and you've collected data about an attack, you can use Python and use that library to build out that same kind of schema of how this worked and then review it in the builder. All right, so let's talk about how do we use attack flows. And so AttackIQ has been using what we call attack graphs for a really long time, and it's using our anatomic engine. And the whole point of an attack graph is essentially what the attack flow is trying to do. It's the structured order of an attack, what occurred in that attack, and what will help me make it realistic so that when I test this, I will test the true capabilities of my EDR and not just a one-off scenario or a series of scenarios that are just all together. And so when you come into the platform, in order to create your own attack graph, you would do the little hamburger icon and you go to assessments. And so we have atomic assessments and anatomic, which is your attack graphs. Click this button to create a new assessment. And in the dropdown, we'll do custom and say we want to create an attack graph. And once I say that, this will take me to our attack graph builder. And this is sort of similar to the attack flow builder, but we use what we call steps. And there's a lot less narrative in here. This is more about the actual actions themselves to be taken. But you can provide a name up at the top. So right now it's just custom attack graph. And maybe I'm going to build an attack graph for the recent sys alert. So I can give it a name, I can give it some description. Right, give a link to what where I found it, and then I say okay. And then now the most important part is building the steps. And so what this allows you to do is actually take the scenarios that we have built and put them inside a flow. And so I'm going to, this is our dev environment, so I have a lot of dev scenarios. So I'm switching to factory. If you have your own custom scenarios on the platform, they would be available to you. And the way that we do is you just add steps. So if we go back to my original example of the ransomware phishing, what I want to do is pull out the scenarios that would be related to that. So I've already done my threat research. I've created my list, whether I use the builder or I just wrote it out in a spreadsheet or a notepad file of how that attack occurred, what order occurred, and now I'll start searching to find scenarios that are relevant. So the first one I want to pull up, I'm using the TID number for doing like a spear phishing message. And so we have a bunch of scenarios that you can either send malicious attachments or play PCAP replay through your environment. So you can pick any one of those. So I'm going to pick this one for sending Ryuk ransomware. And then I also have this really cool scenario that popped up off that tag, initial access using an Office document. And so if I want to know more about any of these scenarios, I just do the hamburger and click the details, and this will show what's exactly occurring. So this scenario is going to use Microsoft Office to open up a macro-enabled document. That macro-enabled document is going to run PowerShell. So this tells you everything that it's going to do. And so I'm going to check mark that one as well. Now the order that it's going to initially place the steps is just the order that I check mark things. So this one would be first, this one would be second, but it's all rearrangeable after you've created them. And I can add more scenarios later, right? I don't have to pick everything at the start. I can add a couple, play around, get the order right, and then add more. But I'm going to keep on adding scenarios to this. The next one up was a deobfuscation. So you can either type in tags here or use the actual tags themselves, and you can get more information here. And so we get deobfuscate, decode files or information. I'm going to check mark that. And we're just going to do a couple more. TO108701. This is for network discovery or account discovery. So in this, we have a couple of different options, right? So actors aren't just using one specific way to achieve their goal. They have many different ways to accomplish that. So we have account discovery using WMI and maybe doing account discovery using NetEXE. If I don't know what they're doing, I can pick what I think is my best option. However, it's a lot better to find ones that are specific. So that's why we have scenarios that do multiple ones. So in this case, I am going to include both because I want to talk about how we do that Boolean logic of what should I do next. So I'll keep those in there. And then I want to grab TO183. This is a file and directory discovery. And I'm going to add in one of our network requests. So I've just selected, a handful of scenarios based on their TIDs. So I got the TIDs from the report. I can find scenarios that match those TIDs, and now it's going to put them in this attack graph. By default, it's just putting them in that order, but as you can see with them all being red, they're not actually connected. So in order to connect them, you have these two little holders. You have a red one and a green one. Red one is not prevented. So if this scenario is not prevented by a security control, what should I do next? And so if I zoom in, this is my sending the Ryuk ransomware through email. And so logically, if I do block those email messages, they're not going to be able to get any farther. And so I'm not going to draw my prevention line to it. I'm only going to draw a not prevented line. And so what this means when we run this is if this attack is prevented, then I stop. There's nothing more that I can do here. If I just want to bypass that no matter what, because maybe I know that the security control always works and I just want to test to see what occurs after, I can still draw that line and it will continue to go forward. But let's just try to keep this as realistic to a single actor. The initial access using the Office document, if it's not prevented, it's going to move into decode some files and use PowerShell. If that's not prevented, now we do our account discovery. And this is where I can start to pivot and go, okay, if I was able to successfully complete account discovery using a WMI command, I don't also need to do the same thing with net.exe. So if I am not prevented at doing that, I'm going to skip over and I'm going to go straight to discovering files. And if I am prevented from doing account discovery with WMI, I'm now going to try to do it with net.exe. Now, maybe this is a core thing. I need this for my check-in. I need this to do something else before I can go, and my graph could stop. A lot of other times, a lot of this stuff is just attempting to collect information. The actor is going to continue forward no matter what. So I can draw both lines. So I would only try the net.exe if I was prevented here from doing it via WMI. And then same thing, on my file and directory discovery script, I can move into here. So this is just a very basic example. You can layer and nest these as much as you want. And so let's take a look at a attack graph that we recently completed. So I'm going to go into our template library. So just like the attack builder has a ton of attack flows already created, we have our own library too of attack graphs that we've created. So in here, you have different types. I'm going to open up the threat emulation category. And so we do a lot of threat actor profiles, their specific attacks. So just in this view, our most recent ones are for Mustang Panda, which is being released today. This is a Chinese threat actor, and we pulled out 2 of their recent attacks and ways that they're doing things. We also covered a bunch of cybercrime loaders recently with BakBot and Emotet. And then there was 2 recent sys alerts, one for Royal ransomware, one for the one that just dropped yesterday, and we'll be releasing that graph today, about exploiting a Telerik vulnerability, deploying web shells and backdoors. And so let's take a look at this Royal ransomware one, because this is one of the most complex attack graphs we've ever released. So when you go into it, we give you that same description. So if you remember in the attack builder, they were talking about, oh, this is this actor, it's doing the following things, where do I go for more information? What's the narrative? So all this information is here. Any special configuration notes. So some of the scenarios are complex and they need additional details from the user. And if there's any kind of warning. So in this case, they were doing some very aggressive behaviors about weakening your security controls. And so we're just providing a warning saying, hey, we're going to do the same kind of thing. All of these are rolled back. So it's not like we're leaving your system vulnerable, but for a short period of time, it would be. So you just say, I want to create an assessment from that template, and this will bring up the existing attack graph. So using the template that we've created. Now this is completely modifiable by you once it loads. So you can see a lot more steps than the small demo that I was showing before, with a lot more of our if prevented and not prevented logic. But if you don't like a scenario, if you don't like a step, you want to add more, you can, right? This is now under your control. This template is not locked. So the way this graph starts is we do this tiered approach to the way we test your AV with malware. So the first scenario is a download. If the download is successful with the if not prevented, then I try to save that file. That MSI file is also going to save a PowerShell script, and that PowerShell script is then going to download another stage. So in this report, there's a lot of stages being downloaded with PowerShell and batch files, and so you'll see a lot of those nested. But you can see the way that we organize these in each row, just like you saw in that attack flow builder when we zoomed out, each row is like a stage of the attack. So this is the initial access stage. Then they move on to dropping their second stage of malware, checking administrative privileges. If they're not an admin, they have to stop because all the things they want to do after that requires elevated rights. Then we move into some discovery, and you just continue to work your way and nest your way down through all of these. And so when you run this, you assign assets to it by going into the assets section. You pick as many hosts that you want to run on this, and then you kick it off. And what this will do is on each host that you've selected, it will start at that first node and just work its way through. And the whole time it's recording, was it successful or not? Did a security control stop me? And if we want to take a look at what real results look like, here's one that I ran against a system with an EDR on it. And we highlight in red any scenarios that were not prevented. So in this case, nothing stopped the initial malware. So this BatLoader MSI and the PowerShell scripts, all of that came down. All of our downloads were successful. Then when we got into their batch files, we actually did stop the saving of them. So AV picked up near command, and it also picked up the batch file that they were using. But everything else continued on. So we were able to see that we are an administrator. We continued to move forward. We downloaded, we blocked another one, got some domain information with WMI, got our environmental variables, got our ARP information. We tried to add an exclusion to Microsoft Defender. They're not in the CDR that we're testing against is not Microsoft Defender. So we can't add an exclusion to Defender because Defender's not running. So it does get prevented. The actor still tries to go forward whether or not they're able to add these exclusions because they're not entirely sure that they're going to get detected. So they'll try it anyway until they hit a real roadblock. So in this case, more downloading of stages, attempting to add more exclusions. And if we can't do that, we just keep going down to the next stage. Here's where we get into all of those semi-dangerous steps, the aggressive steps of disabling different security functionality, removing the task list, removing the start menu, removing regedit. They try to stop the Windows Defender service. And again, Windows Defender is not running, so it can't. And then ultimately we get to a point where they want to load up their next stage. And the way that they do this is code injection. And at this point, the EDR stepped in and it fully blocked out the code injection. And so if I can't load the next stage, then I'm not able to conduct any of those additional steps in the graph. The actor is stopped there. So I feel good knowing that I stopped this half of the graph, but I should be a little worried and concerned that I didn't stop all the stuff above it. And this is where we get into, depending on if I was doing the old atomic assessment, depending on how I organized it, you get that false sense. This, I know exactly what the actors did, how far they got, where my controls stepped in, and I can go into the actual details down here below to see what those controls were. that prevented these things, if there were any detection alerts. But I now have a great starting path of where should I be focusing my detection? Where can I find additional choke points that would help stop these guys earlier in that kill chain? And so down below, besides the visual representation up here, you can actually go into the raw detail. So these are those file savings. So this was the first prevented scenario. And then we also have a second column for detection. This is, were there at least logs to say that something was suspicious going on? And a lot of times you might see, especially if you're using native living off the land, that EDRs will start to say, hey, this might be bad. A series of discovery actions were, conducted over the last 2 minutes or something like that. So those are still wins, but it's not a complete prevention. So in the raw details, you get the activity details. This is a line-by-line debug log, essentially, of what that scenario attempted to do and what failed. So in this case, we tried saving it. We saved it. We waited 3 seconds. This is giving AV a chance to intercept and remove the file from disk. And when we attempted to access that file by making a copy of it, that file cannot be copied. So at this point, AV has stepped in. And if we look at the detection details, we do see that the EDR has found that file. They found it as a Trojan generic and gave it the file hash. So every single step is that same way. And let's expand this so that we can see that final one that stopped it, the code injection via the load library. Same thing, I can open this up and I can see, we attempted to inject this file into this DLL, or this DLL into this binary, and it was unable to do so. We couldn't actually run anything. The detection details, again, we can expand out and see what was picked up. They detect it based off of the file. And under the observable details, we give the command line, the hashes for files. So these are the things that you would then take back to your SIM and try to look back and try to find where did this actually occur in your environment. So that's very quickly at a high level how we use attack graphs. And again, they're fully customizable. So if I were to go back and I don't want to maybe get environmental variables, I want to do some other kind of discovery, I can just right click, I can change that scenario out, and I can pick a different kind of discovery technique. So I'll search for other discovery. And maybe they want system services. So I'll just pick the next one I want, change it, and I can hit save. And we'll swap out that scenario for the other scenario. If I want to add more scenarios, I can click the create steps, and this will take me to that same scenario selection window that you saw before. If I want to change that, if I prevent me here, I don't want it to go any farther, I can right click on those lines and say remove, and then I can always redraw them if I made that mistake. So how can you learn more about attack flows? Well, I really highly recommend going to the CTID page, reading through all of their documentation, read through their blog and their write-up on medium.com as they explain what they were intending to do. They've got some presentations that you can watch about it. And if you want to know more about how we're actually leveraging them, you can read our blog. So we publish for every attack graph, we put out a blog that goes over, what scenarios did we pick? What was the order that we did? This is the one for that giant attack graph that I just talked about, the stop ransomware royal ransomware. So we'll give an overview of what the attack was, and then publicly put out the order of all the steps that we used, why we chose them, what's occurring here. So in this case, ingress tool transfer, what these scenarios are doing, the directory and file permissions modifications that were necessary to make it work, that we use WMI. So we go into full detail. So this is a great way just to see how we're structuring and organizing how the actor worked. And you will see that scenarios repeat themselves. If the malware is doing the same action multiple times, then we want to emulate that and make that action happen multiple times, not just a one-off. And that's where you get into like the command and control traffic, or maybe every time the malware starts up, it collects what the system name is, and then when it does the next stage of malware, that also collects the system name, right? So you want to repeat those scenarios, those techniques over and over again if that's what's really occurring. And at the end of our blogs, we talk about, where do we feel the choke points are? What was some of the most important things that you could focus in on for detection and prevention? So if you were to run it, you can obviously see your own results. And then these are the 3 things that we thought were most important. So stopping all the stages with BatLoader and the tooling that these guys were using, this was heavily using PowerShell to download a bunch of files. This was all occurring over the command line, so you can see these if you're doing command line logging, if you have PowerShell script logging. So these things stand out. Disabling tools, obviously the victim that they were going against was for Microsoft Defender, but if you have a different EDR, you can use our scenarios that target those. And then doing, the most important thing, how do you stop ransomware, right? If you're going to be targeting a ransomware attack and they were able to be successful, everyone else, at least try to prevent your files from being eaten. With that said, that's all I have for today. Check out our blog, check out the AttackIQ Academy where we talk about these things as well. Jordan or Madison, I'm not sure, did we have any questions from the attendees today?
I'm taking a peek right now. Thank you, Ken. Awesome presentation and really good information. Looks like we don't have any questions at the moment, but for all of you on the line, we appreciate you being here. If you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us at info@attackiq.com, or here's Ken's information right here that he's got on the screen. We're always happy to answer whatever questions you have at whatever time. And I'm a marketing gal, so I would be remiss if I didn't encourage all of you to sign up for our Purple Hats Cybersecurity Conference, which is coming up April 6th. It's all virtual, it's free. And there are over 30 amazing sessions you guys will really enjoy, I think. So go to purplehats.org and you can sign up for the conference there. But meanwhile, appreciate all you being here. Be well, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Jordan.